going to go out to Arizona. Paul, he, him, wants to talk about the grounding for knowledge. Hey, Paul, you are on Atheist Experience. What's up?
Hey, how's it going? Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. How are you?
Oh, hey, well, I'm only going to bring the gobbledygook. I'm not going to bring the gook. Someone else.
All
right. Meet us halfway. Meet us halfway.
All right. So I was calling regarding, the grounding for knowledge. And one of my questions is normally, and this will be, honestly, it'll be the second time I've ever called one of these,
cool.
atheist type, chats and stuff. So let's see if y'all can help me out here. So one of my biggest questions I usually ask is on the atheist side, if you guys can, what is the ontology behind your epistemology, metaphysics, and ethic for the grounding of knowledge to be able to make, things meaningful and intelligible on your worldview that is not God?
Yeah. I could go a couple of different routes with this. Like, for instance, I could just go with like the route of like, hey, maybe I don't have one. I'm kind of comfortable with that I'm not, solid on that. But how do you feel about Foundherentism by Susan Hawk?
No, explain it to me. I'm not familiar with it.
It's kind of a blending of coherentism and foundationalism.
Okay, and how would that make knowledge meaningful and intelligible?
Right. So, are you familiar with coherentism and foundationalism, and then infinitism? Are you familiar with the Munchhausen's trilemma?
I may be a little bit. Yeah, if you can just.
That's okay. It's okay if not. I'll happily walk through it. Okay. But the concept is basically that it all falls down to one of these three things, seemingly, and that being that you just have an infinite chain. An infinite regress of things justifying the other things, right? And then you have the foundationalism, which is like presuppositionalism, and that's just you have just the certain claims that just we stop right there, right? The brute facts type of stuff. And then coherentism is basically like a storybook. It's that the start and the finish all make sense with each other, and that's what gives us. So that's called the Munchhausen's trilemma, is that it seems to be those three things that sit as kind of the basis there. But then Susan Hawk, I want to say like in 2000, she started talking about Foundherentism. Now, I don't think it's super caught on or anything, but it is at least an interesting attempt. So I'll shut up for a second so you can kind of give your thoughts.
Yeah. So I'm kind of familiar with it, but yeah, I kind of know it's the Agrippa's trilemma. That's kind of what you were going.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Munchhausen's, yeah. Munchhausen's trilemma.
So with that, you see, there seems to be a little bit of issues at least on my side, because of course, in my view, an infinite regress is, to me, and the way I see this, utterly absurd and impossible. And
why?
As far as circular reasoning, well, because why infinite regress is impossible?
Yeah.
Right. Well, because if the regress would be possible, an infinite regress, then we really wouldn't be able to get to where we're at now, because we'd have an infinite amount of time that we'd have to get.
Can we go forward infinite? Here. Can we go forward infinitely?
You can go. Yes, you can go forward infinite. You cannot go to the past. That would require like a timestamp, and it stops it somewhere to be able to.
So hang on, Paul, real quick. What are you using to arbitrarily cut off the ability to go both forward and backwards infinitely? You need a criteria to determine that. Otherwise, it would be more parsimonious. It would bring in less assumptions to say that it can just work both ways, that infinite can go both forward and backwards infinite. Does that make sense what I just said, or was it gobbledygook?
Yeah. I kind of see, but to me, it doesn't make sense, because if you'd have to contend with an infinite past, you can never go into an infinite future. That would be impossible. And another thing is, I'm sorry?
Yeah, I have a problem with that assertion, right? Because that's all it is.
Okay.
All you've done there is just said the reason. Hang on real quick. All you've done there, Paul, is just said the reason you can't have an infinite past is because you just fucking can't, man. And it's like, well, that's cool that you're positing that, but it sounds to me like it's then on the same equal footing as just positing that, yeah, actually you can, especially if you already agree that it goes infinitely in one direction. Seems more parsimonious, fewer assumptions, right?
Okay, well, as I mentioned before, I mean, if there was an infinite regress, then that means all things that are, contingent between time space would be of a secondary order. There would be no primary to get I guess
then
the
time,
train
but then
moving.
it couldn't go infinitely in the future either. We would be stuck in this moment forever.
No,
you got to see that, right?
You would be able to go infinitely. No.
You couldn't go infinitely in the future because you would never be able to traverse the infinite. You would never be able to traverse the infinite points. That's what I'm saying.
You'd never be able to reach the omega.
Oh, and that's the thing, right? You'll never be able to reach it into the past.
No. Hang on. Paul, hang on. I said something very clear there, and you're going to have to shift your position just a little bit. Either you're going to have to accept that there is no infinite potential for the future, or there is an infinite potential in both categories. You cannot have just one. You cannot say there is an infinite past possibility and no infinite future possibility, or there is an infinite future possibility and no infinite past, because of what I just said. If you are accepting that an infinite past means that you could never traverse the individual points to get to now, an infinite future would also fail for that reasoning. I muted you. I'm so sorry. I'm going to bring you back in. You're going to hear a beep. The beep's gone probably.
Yeah.
Go ahead and respond.
No, I understand. And see, that's kind of, I see it as like as a false dichotomy, because the way I see things, something needs to start. You need to get the train moving for it to start moving forward. And if there is an infinite regress and it's everything's of a secondary order, there is no primary order. And without a primary order to get the train moving, you can't have a secondary.
Why do you need to get the train moving?
Because
what if the train has always been moving?
Right.
What if the train has always been moving?
So how can you get to the past if the train's always been moving infinitely into the past? When would you ever reach?
No. What if the train has always been moving?
Yeah.
Well, then that would be incoherent, because then nothing would be meaningful to start anything at all.
Well, how would it be
assuming that it has to start? I'm suggesting to you, what if the train has always been moving? If that's the case, then there is no start. It was just always moving.
So then how would we even get forward into the future with the train that just has always been moving without ever starting anything? How would we even have a secondary order to begin with? I'm sorry?
You're asking, how would we get to a situation where the train has always been moving from where?
Infinitely from the past. So if a train's been infinitely moving in the past, let's say, for example, let's just get a thought experiment. Let's say we are immortal, right? And we produced a machine that allows us to go into the past linearly, date to date, year by year, all the way to the past. Mm-hmm. And if there was an infinite past, how long would it take for us to reach that point in time?
To reach what?
To reach the infinite past.
Right, infinite, right?
Time.
So then,
what does infinite past mean?
So given that example, how, if there was an infinite past to contend with, how could you ever reach the present?
So the problem right now, and I know this is a little difficult, especially with this, because infinity is weird. Okay, it is a weird thing, right?
Yeah.
But
it is.
Here's the problem. Everything you just said is not a reason to accept that infinity can't go into the past. Right? All you've said is, yeah, but if there is that infinite past, how would we get here? I don't actually need to answer that for it to be the case that there is an infinite past, right? Us not having an answer to that question does not negate the truth as to whether or not the past is infinite, right? And I'll tell you the more important thing. Hang on just a second, Paul, okay? The more important thing is that actually what it is a logical fallacy. And so that construction of an argument cannot reliably lead us to truth. If I say the past could be infinite, we don't know, and you go, nuh-uh, and I go, well, yeah, it could, right? Just based on logically going infinitely into the future. And then you go, yeah, but how would we ever get here if it's infinite in the past? That is not actually pushback on the statement that based on the logic of time going infinitely in the future, it should have the same criteria in the back, unless there is a distinguishing criteria that separates those two. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, Not really. I guess maybe I probably have a hard time, kind of.
That's okay. Let me try again. Yeah, it is. It's all weird, but let me try this again. This is the example that J Mike. Hang on just a second, Paul. Hang on just a second. This is the example that J Mike always gives. Okay, and I love this one, so it's a good one, and I'll steal it from him. If you and I both have a television, and we're standing in front of each other, right? And you go, my television works. It's got great picture. And I go, mine too. And then you go, yours has a hole in it. Have we done anything to determine whether your television works?
No.
That's the response that you just gave me. The response that you just gave me is your television doesn't work, as opposed to telling me why your television does work. Now you. Well,
no, I told you that because if we had an infinite regress, that means all states would be of a secondary order without a primary, and we can't have a secondary without a primary.
Right. And what was Scott's response
to
that?
Let's get into.
What was Scott's response to that? It's really important because you're missing out on the foundationalism aspect of it. You are assuming that we need to have that start. What Scott said was that is not an issue if we take the assumption that it has always been going. There is no necessity for that primary secondary distinction in that understanding. And that understanding of infinitism sits exactly squarely on the same level of plausibility as foundationalism and coherentism. Thus, Agrippa's or Munchhausen's trilemma.
And that's probably a part I can't grasp, but I'll give this example. Okay, so it'll be a distinguishing difference. Okay, let's say for example, time is finite, right? There wasn't an infinite past, and we just began. Something began to exist. We have square zero when we start. Mm-hmm. From square zero, we can move into the future from that point and on, right? Okay, there's nothing that says that we couldn't move from that point in future on forward infinitely.
Except for the reason that we could no, except for the reason that you've given us. No. The reason we could never make it to infinity is because it would be impossible for us to physically traverse the infinite individual points. That was your reasoning for not allowing infinity into the past. And all I'm saying is I'm going to agree with you, Paul, and it works both ways.
And see, and with me, I don't see that as being coherent. It doesn't make sense at all.
Why? How are you able to traverse an infinite future but not an infinite past? What is the difference about infinity?
Well, the thing is, going infinitely into the past, that means you have to contend with an infinite amount of time to reach the current present. And that would make
the same thing going into the future. You would never reach the future.
Why is that a problem? If the past is infinite, why is you have to go through an infinite number of time moments to get to the present? Why is that an issue?
Correct. We wouldn't be here because we wouldn't be here.
No, that's your conclusion. What I'm asking you is why? Why do you think that?
Why? Because we could. Because if there was an infinite past to contend with, we logically and physically could not be here now.
So how do you?
That's your conclusion. Now? Why is what my question was. Why? That thing you just said.
Because you would
put why in front of that.
Okay, so why, man? That's pretty tough, right? Because I mean,
of course,
why? Yeah, I mean, because the only thing is you'd have to contend with an infinite amount of time to be able to get where we're at now. I mean,
so that's not a problem. If there is an infinite past, then we would have an infinite past available to get us to the current moment.
But there wouldn't be. How can an infinite amount of past get us to the current moment when we have a whole infinite amount?
If the past is infinite, then it's possible that we could have been going an infinite amount of time to get to the present.
Right, like hypothetical. Let's for a second, Paul. Let's take the.
That's weird. I mean,
let's take the hypothetical. If the universe actually is infinite, right? Then we did traverse an infinite past to get here, which means it kind of makes sense that we could traverse an infinite past to get to where we could traverse an infinite amount of time to get to the future. Now, there are different sizes of infinity, which is kind of silly, but it's true. The infinite set of whole numbers is a really big number. It's a really big infinite number, but it is still technically a smaller infinity than the set of all the potential numbers, 1.1, 1.2, 1.21, 1.211, all of those are an infinitely larger than that other infinite set. So I know all of this is super weird shit, man, but it does sound like to me,
man, it's weird.
It is, but it's lots of fun too. But it does sound like to me that if hang on just a second, I'm almost done. I swear, I'm almost done. Hang on, Paul. I hate to mute you, but I'm almost done. It does sound like to me you have to bite the bullet one way or the other, and you have to either say there's a finite past and a finite future, or there's an infinite past and an infinite future. It doesn't seem to me that you can have one and not the other, because the very criteria that you're using to discount an infinite past would still apply to you attempting to traverse an infinite future. You would still physically never be able to actually go through all of those points if what you're saying is true. But again, I think there might be infinite stuff, but I'm going to bring you back on. I'm sorry for muting you, Paul.
No,
go ahead. Give us your thoughts.
I get it. So let's go. I like the example you gave earlier, right? When you said there's a smaller infinites as opposed to bigger infinites. And I've kind of, and this is why I kind of see that where you're going with. Let me know if I'm right. You're kind of seeing time as a circular, an infinite circular motion of past, present, and future, just essentially just moving over and over and over nonstop, right? If I get that right, I know if I'm understanding that right.
Not necessarily. A and B theory of time are lots of fun to play around with, but I'm not positive.
That would be one way to satisfy what SR was trying to describe.
Yes, that would.
Another way would be just an infinite number line.
Yeah, just an infinite number line. So.
See, and I guess a lot of it, like the way I'm looking at it, I'm looking at time more of a linear fashion than I am, I guess, in the way you guys are looking at it, right?
I get that.
And that's probably where.
Sorry. Go ahead.
So what I'm trying to get to is this is where the part where kind of it becomes a little bit more incoherent in my mind, I guess, because from what you use that the larger infinites versus smaller infinites, where you said you can be 1.1 to 1.11, 1.1 to the infinite.
Right.
See, to me, let's say, for example, there was a clock, right? There's a clock, 1 to 12, right? And to get from 1 to 2, if we're going to use an infinite amount of numbers to get from 1 to 2, right, that would be incoherent, because then the time, the time to which the time would be moving. Right. Well,
how many numbers?
Right. So
how many numbers are between the number 1 and the number 2? How many numbers are between those two numbers?
Would be infinite, right?
It is infinite, right? It is infinite,
right,
but it's a smaller infinite than the infinite that is all the even numbers, which is a smaller infinite. It's fucking weird. It is fucking weird, Paul. I'm with you, man.
I do, and this is the part where it's just like, okay, so if there's an infinite number between 1 and 2, and this is the part where sometimes math doesn't cohere or stand in causal relations with reality, right? Because if it took an infinite amount of numbers between 1 and 2 to reach the number 2, right, we never get there. Right, we never get there.
But we do every single time we count. Every single time we count, we somehow get there. There's something.
Yes,
you're talking Zeno's paradox here, right?
Yeah. That's exactly. Yeah. Well, hang on, Paul. Let me give you just a couple more seconds to wrap it up, because we've been going for about 20, and we got a couple other really good calls on. But I love the fact that you. No, it's okay. That's okay, because you'll call back in, because you are an awesome interlocutor, dude. I have loved having this conversation with you, and I genuinely think that if more people, atheists, Christians, Scientologists, whatever, if more of us were engaging in these types of discussions, I really, really do think we'd have a better world, man.